Okay, so we're going to be looking at ceremonies, rituals associated with death and mourning. Now, the main thing that we have to say about this is that there isn't one thing that all Buddhists do, because it very much becomes a cultural thing. So they'll do death and mourning differently in Japan than they will do in Tibet, than they will do in India. Um, so they'll have different practices, and lots of these are cultural. So, in some respects, it's a little bit easier to actually explain what is going on, because the main concept that we're all going to have is this idea of saying goodbye, and the idea of impermanence, and that of samsara. So they've got those concepts in place, but how they go about and do it in terms of practicalness of a funeral is going to vary wildly around the world. So now, don't forget, in Buddhism, they believe in samsara. So the karmic energy, when they dies, leaves the body, is reborn into a new one. So it's not seen as the end. It's a cyclical thing. Okay, so it goes around in a cycle. You transition from one form to another. Now, if a loved one has died, you are going to grieve. You are going to be upset. You are attached to that person. You have love for that person. So there's still going to be that whole element of sadness and grief that you are going to go through at losing somebody. But it is also tempered. When I say tempered, it is also part of their belief is that this is not the end. Okay, it isn't about going to heaven or hell. It is about taking on a new form and that karmic energy moving on. So you are not mourning the end of somebody, the end of someone's energy. You are mourning really the this almost like saying goodbye to somebody, to that specific form of energy, but knowing that that energy, that karmic energy, is still going to go on into a new form, into a new body. So funerals remind people of that teaching of impermanence. Nothing lasts. People suffer less if they are able to accept this fact. If you remember the story of Kisagotami, who lost her son, whose son died, and the reason why she was suffering wasn't because her son died. No, remember, grieving is not suffering. It's a perfectly natural, normal thing to grieve, and it's good to grieve. It's healthy to grieve. When suffering comes in, is that when there is an acceptance of the fact that someone has died and we're trying to keep things the same. And so grieving can move into suffering rather than it being a healing thing. So is that thinking? So it is important. It is important that we grieve, but that we don't suffer. And the story of Kisagotama highlights that really well. Now, in Theravada funerals, they don't spend a lot of money on funerals. They're not meant to anyway, because, like I say, it's not the end. But what they can do, what is important for them, is actually to transfer karmic merit, because what they want is for their loved one, for their next life, to be a better life, to be an improvement in life. So the karmic energy needs to be better. Okay, so they will do lots of different things. So one of the things they can do is that uh, they can have cloth which is made into a monk's clothes, into new robes for the senior monk, on behalf of the deceased person, and that is meant to transfer karmic energy so that your loved one in your next life is going to be having a better life. Now, there's no difference to that within Christianity. When we pray for the dead, we're praying that their next life will be a better life. Quote there from a Nepalese Buddhist monk. At the hour of death, the king and the beggar are exactly equal in that no amount of relatives or possessions can affect or prevent death. But who is the richer at the time of death? If the beggar has created more merits, then although he looks materially poor, he is really the rich man. So in Buddhism, it is really all about karmic energy. Remember, karma means action. So you want good action. Okay, so you want good action energy rather than bad action energy, good karmic energy. Now, in lots of different places, there's sort of shrines to display the deceased portrait, along with offerings to the Buddha, candles, incense, flowers. An image of the Buddha is usually placed beside in front of the shrine. Monks will attend because they're seen as the religious people, and they will chant, and they'll attend the funeral of a lay person They may give a sermon, do some Buddhist rites, but we don't go into the details of these Buddhist rites because these will vary from country to country, from culture to culture. So, so that's going to be like Theravada, where they don't spend a lot of money, but they will try and transfer merit to help have a more favourable rebirth. Ceremonies and rituals in Tibet and Japan. So in Tibetan tradition, if we were in school, I would show you a video, a bit of a video of this, not all of it. One of the best known Tibetan traditions is that of the sky burial, in which the body is left in a high place as a gift to the vultures. Just hold that there for a minute. In a mountainous country, short of firewood, often too frozen for grave digging, giving away one's body was seen as both a practical and generous act. So now it is increasingly customary to burn the body instead, because we now have access to transport and they can move people to, and so they can cremate the body like they do in other cultures. So this Tibetan sky funeral where you lay the body out and let the vultures consume the body. To us in the West, sounds incredibly graphic and not very loving, but from their point of view, it's incredibly practical. Like it says, it's frozen. You can't bury them. You can't cremate the body. You can't just leave the body. It's disrespectful to leave the body there. And actually, Vinci the Vultures emphasizes the whole idea of impermanence. That karmic energy has moved on from that physical body. So that person that we loved is no longer there. But you can see why it's very famous. So but now they will more likely to cremate the body instead. And if you are a revered teacher, religious leader, you've been cremated, and some of your remains may be placed into, called a chorten. It's sometimes known as a stupa as well, where some of your remains could be placed in a pot and it's put in a stupa. It's like a mound. It becomes a sort of pilgrimage and worship for other people to come across. And they'll say prayers and have offerings, and every 7 days for 49 days after the death, so for 7 weeks. Now, in Japanese Pure Land traditions, the coffin may be placed with the head pointing west, while those who assemble chant Namo Amida Butsu as they process around it. Now, that's, if you remember in Pure Land, the Pure Land is meant to be in the west, and it's led by Amida Buddha, and it's hoping that this person who's died is going to enter into Pure Land. In Nichiren Buddhist funerals, including readings from the Lotus Sutra, it's common across all Japanese traditions for relations to gather after the cremation and pick out the bones from the ashes using chopsticks. As in Tibet, these remains may be kept for 49 days and prayers offered every 7th day. Now, for us in this country, this all sounds incredibly strange. But you've got to remember, for what we do, it's going to seem strange for people in Japan and in Tibet. It's culturally relevant for them. And so for them, this is how they grieve. This is how they come to accept that the person that they have loved has moved on, that the karmic energy has moved on, that everything is impermanent. And these rituals have been put in place to help reinforce those teachings, but also to help people grieve for their loved one. I mean, they might argue from what we do in the West, where you go to a crematorium maybe, and there's a coffin there, and then the coffin disappears, and that's it, and you don't see the body. They would look at that as very strange as well. How does that help you grieve? How does that help you understand that this person has moved on? So from there, we have to be careful from a cultural perspective to go, well, that's weird, I wouldn't do it like that. And to understand that these things have been put in place to help people to reinforce their beliefs, but also to help them grieve. They would argue that we hide death away, and maybe that's why they would say that we have problems when it comes to grieving, because we don't accept that person is gone. And then that leads to suffering. So for them, they're saying these rituals enable them to accept that person's moved on, accept that grieving is a perfectly natural process that you go through, and because you've accepted all of that, you are less likely to suffer. So what you have here, there's no red box on this one, so there's no keywords really for you to be looking at. The main takeaway thing about this is that culturally everything's different when it comes to funerals around the world for Buddhists. but they still put rituals in place to recognize the karmic energy has moved on, so hopefully there'll be more favorable rebirth, and to help them grieve and to come to terms with that everything has changed, and Anika, impermanence. So you've got some activities here that you can sort of like put in your book, or you can put in your however you're doing some in your Word documents. Some Theravada. Buddhists believe they can transfer merit to another person, explain what this means, how this belief can be seen at Theravada funeral. This is not complicated. This bit, question 1, also is not complicated as well. Which do you think Buddhists would agree with, and which do you think Buddhists would disagree with? Give reasons for your view. Be also interested to know which one you think is more accurate, or why you disagree with all of them. Okay, so that is it, really. Again, not complicated. This would be an interesting discussion activity. Do you think that Buddhist teachings about the naturalness of impermanence could make it easier to accept the fact that someone you love has died? So the concept of, from Buddhist concept that things are always going to change, that we recognize that we live in a cycle of life, the samsara. We are going to be born, we live, we die, then we are reborn. There's a karmic energy, we determine the next life. The acceptance of that, does it make it easier to accept? You're going to grieve, you're going to cry, but knowing that they're going to be reborn, does that make it, and knowing that life is impermanent, does that make it easier to accept the fact? What do you think? Okay, so that is funerals and what's the title? Funerals associated, individuals associated with death and mourning.